Hi Year 12, we are up to section 7. We've just left off with Clarissa having a bit of a existential crisis, I guess. Maybe not a crisis, she's questioning her worth and the meaning of life as she is having a bit of an afternoon rest. Richard has just been and given her the roses and after his walk. Now, she is in the middle of a thought here. The last section ended with this ellipsis, and I think that there's that sense that that thought is kind of always there and ready to come, forth to be pondered again, and then it's interrupted by life, by Elizabeth coming into the room. The door opened. Elizabeth knew that her mother was resting. She came in very quietly. She stood perfectly still. Was it that some Mongol had been wrecked on the coast of Norfolk, as Mrs. Hilbery said, had mixed with the Dalloway ladies, perhaps 100 years ago? Now, that is the term for an East Asian ethnic group, Mongolia, and what she's thinking about here is the fact that Elizabeth has got quite different features to herself, and she's becoming very beautiful, but looks like there's some ethnicity there that's perhaps come from someone long ago in the family line. For the Dalloways in general were fair-haired, blue-eyed. Elizabeth, on the contrary, was dark, had Chinese eyes and a pale face, an oriental mystery, was gentle, considerate still. As a child, she had had a perfect sense of humour, but now at 17, why, Clarissa could not in the least understand. She had become very serious, like a hyacinth, sheathed in glossy green, with buds just tinted, a hyacinth which has had no sun. So here we've got the flower motif with hyacinth. Elizabeth as a hyacinth, fresh, pale, serious and quiet. And here there are echoes of T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, and in that very long poem there's the hyacinth girl. And so if you remember, I mentioned a while ago that T.S. Eliot had come over to Virginia and Leonard and read his poem The Waste Land prior to its publication, and they actually then went ahead and published it on their printing press. So the other part of that annotation is here. Elizabeth is distanced from her mother in both looks and temperament. A hyacinth also symbolises rebirth, so it's like she is Clarissa's replacement. So we've got Clarissa pondering the fact that she, can't have children anymore, and whether she's got worth, and she is very aware of Elizabeth being right on the threshold of adulthood and entering into what will be her life. And I mean her own life, Elizabeth's life, not that she's entering Clarissa's. Let me just remind you too that with the annotations, just pause and write them into your book, but whilst I'm reading, please be following along and listening to the actual narrative, okay? She stood quite still and looked at her mother, but the door was ajar, and outside the door was Miss Kilman, as Clarissa knew. Miss Kilman in her mackintosh, listening to whatever they said. And now we shift to Miss Kilman's point of view. She is the tutor that Elizabeth has, and earlier on there was quite a bit around how Clarissa doesn't like Miss Kilman. She really despises her for some reason, and we'll see that the feeling is quite mutual here. Yes, Miss Kilman stood on the landing and wore a mackintosh, but had her reasons. First, it was cheap. Second, she was over 40 and did not, after all, dress to please. She was poor, moreover, degradingly poor. Otherwise she would not be taking jobs from people like the Dalloways, from rich people who liked to be kind. Mr. Dalloway, to do him justice, had been kind, but Mrs. Dalloway had not. She had been merely condescending. She came from the most worthless of all classes, the rich, with a smattering of culture. They had expensive things everywhere, pictures, carpets, lots of servants. She considered that she had a perfect right to anything that the Dalloways did for her. She had been cheated. Yes, the word was no exaggeration, for surely a girl has a right to some kind of happiness, and she had never been happy. What with being so clumsy and so poor. And then, just as she might have had a chance at Miss Dolby's school, the war came, and she had never been able to tell lies. Miss Dolby thought she would be happier with people who shared her views about the Germans. So this is referring to she had just gotten a job at this school, and then the war started, and of course England was fighting against Germany, and Miss Kilman has come from Germany, and so that meant she was fired from the school because she had some sympathies for the German people. She had to go. It was true that the family was of German origin, spelt the name Kellman in the 18th century, but her brother had been killed. They turned her out because she would not pretend that the Germans were all villains. And she had German friends, when the only happy days of her life had been spent in Germany, and after all she could read history. She had had to take whatever she could get. Mr. Dalloway had come across her working for the Friends. Now, that is referring to a religious group called the Quakers. He had allowed her, and that was really generous of him, to teach his daughter history. Also, she did a little extension lecturing and so on. Then our Lord had come to her, and here she always bowed her head. She had seen the light 2 years and 3 months ago. Now she did not envy women like Clarissa Dalloway, she pitied them. So she is, I guess, what you'd call a born-again Christian, and she's very pious in her religious beliefs. She pitied and despised them from the bottom of her heart as she stood on the soft carpet, looking at the old engraving of a little girl with a muff. With all this luxury going on, what hope was there for a better state of things? Instead of lying on a sofa, "My mother is resting," Elizabeth had said. She should have been in a factory, behind a counter, Mrs. Dalloway and all the other fine ladies. Bitter and burning, Miss Kilman had turned into a church 2 years, 3 months ago. She had heard the Reverend Edward Whittaker preach, the boys sing, had seen the solemn lights descend, and whether it was the music or the voices, she herself, when alone in the evening, found comfort in a violin, but the sound was excruciating. She had no ear. The hot and turbulent feelings which boiled and surged in her had been assuaged as she sat there, and she had wept copiously and gone to call on Mr. Whittaker at his private house in Kensington. It was the hand of God, he said. The Lord had shown her the way. So now, whenever the hot and painful feelings boiled within her, this hatred of Mrs. Dalloway, this grudge against the world, she thought of God. She thought of Mr. Whittaker. Rage was succeeded by calm. A sweet savour filled her veins. Her lips parted, and standing formidable upon the landing in her mackintosh, she looked with steady and sinister sincerity at Mrs. Dalloway, who came out with her daughter. So you'll notice that I've circled the S's here because we've got this effect of sibilance, and the annotation is that this is Virginia Woolf's critique of religion here. So the sibilance enhances the sinister and hateful nature of Miss Kilman's religious justification for her bitter judgments. So with religion being, supposed to be about love and forgiveness and peace, and yet here we have this hatred within Miss Kilman and this bitterness that she directs towards the upper classes and especially towards Clarissa Dalloway. Elizabeth said she had forgotten her gloves. That was because Miss Kilman and her mother hated each other. She could not bear to see them together. She ran upstairs to find her gloves. But Miss Kilman did not hate Mrs. Dalloway. Turning her large gooseberry-coloured eyes upon Clarissa, observing her small pink face, her delicate body, her air of freshness and fashion, Miss Kilman felt full. Simpleton, you who have known neither sorrow nor pleasure, who have trifled your life away. And there rose in her an overmastering desire to overcome her, to unmask her. If she could have felled her, it would have eased her. But it was not the body, it was the soul and its mockery that she wished to subdue, make feel her mastery. If only she could make her weep, could ruin her, humiliate her, bring her to her knees crying, "You are right." But this was God's will, not Miss Kilman's. It was to be a religious victory. So she glared, so she glowered. Annotation. So God here represented as vengeful, and there's this sense of spiritual righteousness. Now, the modernists, remember, were questioning religion, and there was a real turning away from religious belief. And so it works in this sense to present this vengeful God. You might want to, whilst you're here, write down this, which relates to the underlining in another paragraph's time, where we have monster imagery of this religious hate. So it's all connected there, okay? Clarissa was really shocked. This a Christian, this woman. This woman had taken her daughter from her. She in touch with invisible presences, heavy, ugly, commonplace, without kindness or grace. She knew the meaning of life. That is an intrusion of Clarissa's point of view. Then we go back to Miss Kilman for a paragraph, and then we're going to Clarissa's point of view for a little bit. So here we are, back to Miss Kilman. In a moment. "You are taking Elizabeth to the stores," Mrs. Dalloway said. Miss Kilman said she was. They stood there. Miss Kilman was not going to make herself agreeable. She had always earned her living. Her knowledge of modern history was thorough in the extreme. She did out of her meagre income set aside so much for causes she believed in, whereas this woman did nothing, believed nothing, brought up her daughter. But here was Elizabeth, rather out of breath, the beautiful girl. So remember, there is this suggestion of homosexual love that is between Elizabeth and Miss Kilman, or the parents suspect that something's going on. And indeed, Miss Kilman is quite in love with Elizabeth and her beauty, and we don't get that sense from Elizabeth, certainly not in this section, but from Miss Kilman, absolutely. So they were going to the stores. This is Clarissa's point of view. Odd it was, as Miss Kilman stood there, and stand she did with the power and taciturnity of some prehistoric monster armoured for primeval warfare. How second by second the idea of her diminished, how hatred, which was for ideas not people, crumbled, how she lost her malignity. Her size became second by second merely Miss Kilman, in a mackintosh, whom heaven knows Clarissa would have liked to help. So Clarissa's hatred to Miss Kilman just suddenly diminishes, and she realises, she sees her as just simply Miss Kilman. And this underlining here, where we've got the monster imagery, and we can see that peace comes with diminished religion. So when Miss Kilman is thinking about Clarissa and bringing in religion, the bitterness and the hatred is intense. And when Clarissa kind of diminishes that idea, she has got a sense of peace. At this dwindling of the monster, Clarissa laughed. So if you think of here, the monster is religion. So it's at the dwindling of religion, Clarissa laughed. And Clarissa wouldn't be thinking about that as in religious terms. This is what Woolf is symbolically saying to her reader. Saying goodbye, she laughed. Off they went together, Miss Kilman and Elizabeth, downstairs. And this all echoes page 9, where the monster was the hate Clarissa has for Miss Kilman. And that was over here where we had this lurking discontent, and she had, it rasped her though to have this stirring about in her, this brutal monster, and that's where she was talking about Miss Kilman. All right, now, one of the things that I've kind of added. If you are following along with the colours and things like that, this is helpful. I keep referring to modernist concerns that don't necessarily fit in with the categories that we'd identified earlier. And so I have just started a bit of a list. I've just put this at the back of my book of these modernist concerns that keep on appearing that aren't necessarily firmly attached to something else. And so we've got industrialisation and urbanisation. That's a really big one for the modernists. Disconnection, religion, and then the instability of self-identity. Now that could definitely go in with the mental health and isolation, existential colour for sure. Just for my own notes, I've kind of got it a little bit separate there. It's up to you if you want to do that. So this is all about the modernist concern of the instability of self. We might just write down the note first, if you like. So we've got modernist concern, the instability of self-identity. Clarissa sees love and religion as controlling forces that seek to impose their own truths onto others. Her desire for complete autonomy is seen in the anaphora of let her. Okay, let's look. With a sudden impulse, with a violent anguish, for this woman was taking her daughter from her, Clarissa leant over the banisters and cried out, "Remember the party! Remember our party tonight!" But Elizabeth had already opened the front door. There was a van passing. She did not answer. Love and religion, thought Clarissa, going back into the drawing room, tingling all over. How detestable they are! For now that the body of Miss Kilman was not before her, it overwhelmed her, the idea. The cruellest things in the world, she thought, seeing them clumsy, hot, domineering, hypocritical, eavesdropping, jealous, infinitely cruel and unscrupulously dressed in a mackintosh coat on the landing. Love and religion. Had she ever tried to convert anyone herself? Did she not wish everybody merely to be themselves? And she watched out of the window the lady opposite climbing upstairs. Let her climb upstairs if she wanted to. Let her stop. Then let her, as Clarissa had often seen her, gain her bedroom, part her curtains, and disappear again into the background. Somehow one respected that, the old woman looking out of the window, quite unconscious that she was being watched. There was something solemn in it. But love and religion would destroy that. Whatever it was, the privacy of the soul. The odious Kilman would destroy it. Yet it was a sight that made her want to cry. So here she's referring to the fact that a religious person like Miss Kilman seeks to convert other people into her own beliefs, and everything that she does is guided by religion. And so not only does a religious person seek to change other people, but religion itself changes people because it dictates how they should act and how they should think, according to Clarissa and according to Miss Dalloway. And she also thinks of love like in terms of Peter, and the fact, like she's about to go on and talk about that, and the fact that Peter wanted to that he's kind of wanting to change or possess the women that he loves. And we spoke about that ages ago when we first talked about monster imagery, and that love is possessive and narcissistic, and it's an attempt to capture the other. So she's thinking about these things again when she's talking about love here. When she's looking out at the old woman in the window, she's looking out the window at the old lady in the building opposite, and so she can see in, and she can see this old woman and see that she's moving about, but she's never spoken to her. She doesn't know her, and yet she's, unaware that she's being watched. But in that, there's this privacy of the soul. Like Clarissa understands that old woman has got a soul, and that it's private, and that no one would truly know her. Now, what is important here is that throughout Woolf's work, separate rooms act as representations of individual souls. Now, when I say throughout Woolf's work, I'm talking about her other novels, and she wrote a very, very famous essay called A Room of One's Own. So when she is kind of referring to looking through the window and into a room, and when people are kind of enclosed in their rooms, it is quite a significant symbolic message that Woolf is giving about that, representations of individual souls. So this scene that we've got here condenses the heart of the novel and the paradox between aloneness and connection, because remember, all the characters in the novel want to connect, but then there's also this need to be alone and to have this privacy, but then not too alone and certainly not alienated, but then there's this sense of alienation. So that's the paradox, wanting aloneness and connection. And over here, you might as well write this down now, because this symbolic use of the room carries on. The room used to metaphorically represent the soul of a person, and the windows provide a glimpse and a barrier. So the windows themselves are a bit of a paradox, because a window is used quite often in literature and film as that barrier. You can look out and you can see a sense of something, but you can't go out. The window is preventing you from actually entering. And so that's what we're about to read over here in just a moment. Love destroyed too. Everything that was fine, everything that was true went. Take Peter Walsh now. There was a man, charming, clever, with ideas about everything. If you wanted to know about the Pope, say, or Addison, or just to talk nonsense, what people were like, what things meant, Peter knew better than anyone. It was Peter who had helped her, Peter who had lent her books. But look at the women he loved. Vulgar, trivial, commonplace. Think of Peter in love. He came to see her after all these years, and what did he talk about? Himself. Horrible, horrible passion, she thought. Degrading passion, she thought, thinking of Kilman and her Elizabeth walking to the Army and Navy stores. Now we've got time motif. Big Ben struck the half hour. Now, before we read this, you can pause and write this. I'll read it if it's a little bit hard to see on your screen. Time motif. The consistency and control of time connects everyone. An element of the spider web that connects us. So remember the metaphor of the spider's thread that connected Richard with Lady Bruton. Here it is time that has got, it refers to this string, so it's using that same notion of that thread that connects. And here the one consistent thing, the one constant, is that moving along of time and how it dictates to people things that need to be done. You know, when our bell goes at 3:10, everybody knows it's time to leave school, and so you've kind of got this collective movement because time has told us to do so. How extraordinary it was, strange, yes, touching to see the old lady, they had been neighbours ever so many years, move away from the window, as if she were attached to that sound, that string, gigantic as it was. It had something to do with her. Down, down into the midst of ordinary things, the finger fell, making the moment solemn. She was forced, so Clarissa imagined, by that sound, to move, to go. But where? Clarissa tried to follow her as she turned and disappeared, and could still just see her white cap moving at the back of the bedroom. She was still there, moving about at the other end of the room. Why creeds and prayers and mackintoshes when, thought Clarissa, that's the miracle, that's the mystery, that old lady, she meant, whom she could see going from chest of drawers to dressing table. She could still see her. And the supreme mystery which Kilman might say she had solved, or Peter might say he had solved, but Clarissa didn't believe either of them had the ghost of an idea of solving, was simply this. Here was one room, there another. Did religion solve that? or love. Now, here, the note that goes along with what's happening there with time is the paradox of privacy and communication, which is very much linked with the paradox between aloneness and connection. Now, for both Clarissa and Virginia Woolf, is that human souls are inherently alone, as true communication is difficult or impossible. We all exist in different rooms, but there is also comfort in this privacy. So we want people to understand us, but the modernists really believe that true communication, that ability to know exactly what someone is thinking, is impossible. So we all have our own different rooms in which we exist. But given that we want privacy, then there's that positive side of it, hence the paradox. And now we've got the second chiming of the bells, because Big Ben, starts with a sound, and then it does the longer tolling of the bells to say what the time actually is. Love, but here the other clock, the clock which always struck 2 minutes after Big Ben, came shuffling in with its lap full of odds and ends, which it dumped down as if Big Ben were all very well, with his majesty laying down the law, so solemn, so just. But she must remember all sorts of little things besides. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices. All sorts of little things came flooding and lapping and dancing in on the wake of that solemn stroke, which lay lapped like a bar of gold on the sea. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices. She must telephone now at once. And here, this is the control of time. So with this reminder of what the time is, she suddenly goes back into planning mode and organisation, and these are all the things that she needs to still do to get ready for the party tonight. Now we shift here to Miss Kilman's point of view, and remember that at the halfway mark the novel becomes a little bit more ordered in terms of the time signifying shifts to different perspectives, and so we've got an example of that here with Miss Kilman hearing the sound of the time. Volubly, troublously, the late clock sounded, coming in on the wake of Big Ben, with its lap full of trifles. Beaten up, broken up by the assault of carriages, the brutality of vans, the eager advance of myriads of angular men, of flaunting women, the domes and spires of offices and hospitals. The last relics of this lap full of odds and ends seemed to break, like the spray of an exhausted wave, upon the body of Miss Kilman, standing still in the street for a moment to mutter, "It is the flesh." We've got the wave motif here, the spray of an exhausted wave. So the wave here is exhausted by the relentlessness of time and its demands. Now let's write down the annotation for what we're about to read. Now I've got this as the mental health, isolation, existential struggles colour. Doris Kilman's strong emotions about Clarissa mirror Clarissa's strong emotions about her. Rhetorical questions equal existential questioning, and we see that she desires self-love. So we're about to see that for Miss Kilman, she is not an attractive woman. She is quite ugly. She doesn't have money. She doesn't have nice clothes, and so she has this huge amount of resentment and bitterness because she feels that she's been cheated in life, that she hasn't been given the opportunity for, I guess, partnership and love that others around her have because of something that she has got no control over. And so her purpose in life looks a little bit different. All right. So she says, it was the flesh that she must control. Clarissa Dalloway had insulted her. That she expected. But she had not triumphed. She had not mastered the flesh. Ugly, clumsy. Clarissa Dalloway had laughed at her for being that, and had revived the fleshly desires was she minded looking as she did beside Clarissa? So when she's saying it is the flesh and I must control the flesh, she's aware that especially in her religious belief, that it's quite superficial to be so concerned about the way that you look, and that the desires of the flesh and her desire to look more beautiful is not very honourable, and she's trying to control that and I guess rise above that care. But we can see with her repetition of it is the flesh, just how difficult that is, because it is that opinion of herself that prevents her from having the self-love that would give her some peace and comfort. And, it's also, people talk about the desires of the flesh to mean sexual desires as well. And because she is alone and she doesn't have a partner, and she is in love with Elizabeth, but that's never going to happen. She does have these desires that she is trying to just, shove down and have them go away through being ignored. She wants to be stronger than how her body feels. So she minded looking as she did beside Clarissa, nor could she talk as she did. But why wish to resemble her? Why? And this is why she's really questioning herself. Like, she's like, I know it doesn't matter. I know that's not who I am. Why do I so desire to look beautiful like Clarissa? She despised Mrs. Dalloway from the bottom of her heart. She was not serious. She was not good. Her life was a tissue of vanity and deceit. Yet Doris Kilman had been overcome. She had, as a matter of fact, very nearly burst into tears when Clarissa Dalloway laughed at her. It is the flesh, she muttered, it being her habit to talk aloud, trying to subdue this turbulent and painful feeling as she walked down Victoria Street. She prayed to God. She could not help being ugly. She could not afford to buy pretty clothes. Clarissa Dalloway had laughed, but she would concentrate her mind upon something else until she had reached the pillar box. At any rate, she had got Elizabeth. But she would think of something else. She would think of Russia until she reached the pillar box. How nice it must be, she said, in the country, struggling, as Mr. Whittaker had told her, with that violent grudge against the world which had scorned her, sneered at her, cast her off, beginning with this indignity, the infliction of her unlovable body which people could not bear to see. Do her hair as she might, her forehead remained like an egg, bald white. No clothes suited her. She might buy anything, and for a woman, of course, that meant never meeting the opposite sex. Never would she come first with anyone. And that's really sad. Never would she come first with anyone. Sometimes lately it had seemed to her that, except for Elizabeth, her food was all that she lived for. Her comforts, her dinner, her tea, her hot water bottle at night. But one must fight, vanquish, have faith in God. Mr. Whittaker had said she was there for a purpose. But no one knew the agony, he said, pointing to the crucifix. That God knew. But why should she have to suffer when other women like Clarissa Dalloway escaped? Knowledge comes through suffering, said Mr. Whittaker. So the annotation for that is, she is looking for purpose and identity in religion, but it has not overcome her agony of missing out on beauty and the resulting loneliness, the judgment of others due to her appearance. And I think that here Woolf is suggesting that religion is a poor substitute for love and human connection. Okay. She had passed the pillar box, and Elizabeth had turned into the cool brown tobacco department of the Army and Navy stores while she was still muttering to herself that what Mr. Whittaker had said about knowledge coming through suffering and the flesh. The flesh, she muttered. What department did she want? Elizabeth interrupted her. Petticoats, she said abruptly, and stalked straight on to the lift. Up they went, Elizabeth guided her this way and that, guided her in her abstraction, as if she had been a great child, an unwieldy battleship. There were the petticoats, brown, decorous, striped, frivolous, solid, flimsy, and she chose in her abstraction portentously, and the girl serving thought her mad. So here we are shifting to the point of view of Elizabeth. Elizabeth rather wondered, as they did up the parcel, what Miss Kilman was thinking. "They must have their tea," said Miss Kilman, rousing, collecting herself. They had their tea. Elizabeth rather wondered whether Miss Kilman could be hungry. It was her way of eating with intensity, then looking again and again at a plate of sugared cakes on the table next to them. Then, when a lady and a child sat down and the child took the cake, could Miss Kilman really mind it? Yes, Miss Kilman did mind it. She had wanted that cake, the pink one. The pleasure of eating was almost the only pleasure left her. And then to be baffled even in that. So you can see here this symbolic notion of wanting what she can't have. And here it's just symbolically a sugared cake. When people are happy, they have a reserve, she had told Elizabeth, upon which to draw, whereas she was like a wheel without a tyre. She was fond of such metaphors, jolted by every pebble, so she would say, staying on after the lesson, standing by the fireplace with her bag of books, her satchel, she called it, on a Tuesday morning, after the lesson was over. Now, this next section, you'll see, I haven't actually written any annotations on these 2 pages, and not terribly much on the next, so we have a bit of a break. This is about Miss Kilman, and from Elizabeth's point of view, she talks about how Miss Kilman really goes on a lot about how unfortunate she is and how unfair it is, and that it is really off-putting. And I guess there's a sense of irony that Miss Kilman wants connection, and without the physical appearance to attract that, all she has is her personality and the way that people like her. But when she's kind of bitter and negative and that's what she presents, well, it prevents any chance that she might have for that connection. So that's kind of what we're hearing here. And she's remembering things that Miss Kilman has said and done when their lessons are finished on a Tuesday and they're just left having a conversation. And she talked too about the war. After all, there were people who did not think the English invariably right. There were books, there were meetings, there were other points of view. Would Elizabeth like to come with her to listen to so-and-so? Most extraordinary looking old man. Then Miss Kilman took her to some church in Kensington, and they had tea with a clergyman. She had lent her books. Law, medicine, politics, all professions are open to women of your generation, said Miss Kilman. But for herself, her career was absolutely ruined. And was it her fault? Good gracious, said Elizabeth. No. And her mother would come calling to say that a hamper had come from Bourton, and would Miss Kilman like some flowers? To Miss Kilman she was always very, very nice, but Miss Kilman squashed the flowers all in a bunch, and hadn't any small talk. And what interested Miss Kilman bored her mother. Miss Kilman and she were terrible together, and Miss Kilman swelled and looked very plain. But Miss Kilman was frightfully clever. Elizabeth had never thought about the poor. They lived with everything they wanted. Her mother had breakfast in bed every day. Lucy carried it up, and she liked old women because they were duchesses, and being descended from some lord. But Miss Kilman said one of those Tuesday mornings when the lesson was over, "My grandfather kept an oil and colour shop in Kensington." Miss Kilman was quite different from anyone she knew. She made one feel so small. And so here she's saying that despite that, she has this real admiration for Miss Kilman's intelligence and her knowledge and how she's educated Elizabeth. Now we switch point of view back to Miss Kilman. Miss Kilman took another cup of tea. Elizabeth, with her oriental bearing, her inscrutable mystery, sat perfectly upright. No, she did not want anything more. She looked for her gloves, her white gloves. They were under the table. Ah, But she must not go. Miss Kilman could not let her go. This youth, that was so beautiful, this girl whom she genuinely loved. Her large hand opened and shut on the table. But perhaps it was a little flat somehow, Elizabeth felt, and really she would like to go. But, said Miss Kilman, I've not quite finished yet. Of course, then Elizabeth would wait, but it was rather stuffy in here. Are you going to the party tonight? Miss Kilman said. Elizabeth supposed she was going. Her mother wanted her to go. She must not let parties absorb her, Miss Kilman said, fingering the last 2 inches of a chocolate eclair. She did not much like parties, Elizabeth said. Miss Kilman opened her mouth, slightly projected her chin, and swallowed down the last inches of the chocolate eclair, then wiped her fingers and washed the tea around in a cup. She was about to split asunder, she felt. The agony was so terrific. If she could grasp her, if she could clasp her, if she could make her hers absolutely forever and then die, that was all she wanted. But to sit here, unable to think of anything to say, to see Elizabeth turning against her, to be felt repulsive even by her, it was too much. She could not stand it. The thick fingers curled inwards. So Elizabeth wants to go, and she's trying to keep her from leaving, and the pain that she feels in loving her and knowing that that won't ever be returned is, it feels like she's being torn in half. I never go to parties, said Miss Kilman, just to keep Elizabeth from going. People don't ask me to parties. And she knew as she said it that it was this egotism that was her undoing. Mr. Whittaker had warned her, but she could not help it. She had suffered so horribly, so she is aware that when she makes herself look pitiful and tries to get people's sympathy, that it actually turns them off, but she can't help it. Why should they ask me? She said. I'm plain. I'm unhappy. She knew it was idiotic, but it was all those people passing, people with parcels who despised her, who made her say it. However, she was Doris Kilman. She had her degree. She was a woman who had made her way in the world. Her knowledge of modern history was more than respectable. I don't pity myself, she said. I pity... She meant to say, your mother. But no, she could not to Elizabeth. I pity other people much more. Like some dumb creature who has been brought up to a gate for an unknown purpose and stands there longing to gallop away. Elizabeth Dalloway sat silent. Was Miss Kilman going to say anything more? Don't quite forget me, said Doris Kilman. Her voice quivered. Right away to the end of the field, the dumb creature galloped in terror. So here we've got Elizabeth is... Here a simile is being used for Elizabeth as a dumb creature, who's fenced in a paddock and just wants to run away. And then metaphorically here it becomes the dumb creature who gallops in terror. And this intensity of don't quite forget me and don't go, and it makes Elizabeth very much want to leave. The great hand opened and shut. Elizabeth turned her head. The waitress came. One had to pay at the desk, Elizabeth said, and went off, drawing out, so Miss Kilman felt, the very entrails in her body, stretching them as she crossed the room, and then, with a faint twist, bowing her head very politely, she went. Now, actually, one thing I am going to write here, I almost did when I did these annotations last night, and I think I should have, is that this metaphor here of the spider web as being that connection, here it's changed suddenly into the very kind of visceral image of it now being her entrails. And so then with a final twist, okay, so I think this is obviously it's quite a gruesome image, and I think it speaks to the fact that it's so intense for her because she doesn't have the connections that other people do, and the one that she desperately wants is not a connection in the way that she wants it to be, and she knows that it's never going to be. So it's more, I guess, deadly in a sense. Like if your entrails are stretched across the floor, then that's not a very livable situation, and in that sense it's the intensity of her feeling for Elizabeth, and she knows that it feels like it's killing her. So I'm just going to put this down here as spiderweb metaphor becomes Miss Kilman's entrails, and we're going to say it's visceral imagery my dog is barking. The intensity of her feelings for Elizabeth and knowledge that her connection will never be what she desires. Okay. Okay. She had gone. Miss Kilman sat at the marble table among the eclairs, stricken once, twice, thrice by shocks of suffering. She had gone. Mrs. Dalloway had triumphed. Elizabeth had gone. Beauty had gone. Youth had gone. And you'll see here, she feels abandoned. She thinks that she's in, or she feels like she's in this competition for Elizabeth, that either Miss Dalloway will have her or she will have her, which is, quite unreasonable. This is her mother, but she is trying to take Elizabeth away from her mother, but it's never going to happen. So she got up, blundered off among the little tables, rocking slightly from side to side, and somebody came after her with her petticoat, and she lost her way and was hemmed in by trunks specially prepared for taking to India. Next got among the accoutrement sets and baby linen, through all the commodities of the world, perishable and permanent, hams, drugs, flowers, stationery, variously smelling, now sweet, now sour. She lurched. She saw herself thus lurching, with her hat askew, very red in the face, full length in a looking-glass, and at last came out onto the street. So that's all the things in the department store that she's passing as she goes out into the street. The tower of Westminster Cathedral rose in front of her, the habitation of God. In the midst of the traffic, there was the habitation of God. Doggedly she set off with her parcel to that other sanctuary, the Abbey, where, raising her hands into a tent before her face, so she's doing the prayer hands, she sat beside those driven into shelter too, the variously assorted worshippers, now divested of social rank, almost of sex, as they raised their hands before their faces, but once they removed them, instantly reverent, middle class, English men and women, some of them desirous of seeing the waxworks. But Miss Kilman held her tent before her face. Now she was deserted, now rejoined. New worshippers came in from the street to replace the strollers, and still, as people gazed round and shuffled past the tomb of the unknown warrior, still she barred her eyes with her fingers and tried in this double darkness, for the light in the Abbey was bodiless, to aspire above the vanities, the desires, the commodities, to rid herself both of hatred and of love. Her hands twitched, she seemed to struggle, yet to others God was accessible, and the path to him smooth. Mr. Fletcher, retired of the Treasury, Mrs. Gorman, widow of the famous K.C., approached him simply, and having done their praying, leant back, enjoyed the music, the organ pealed sweetly, and saw Miss Kilman at the end of the row, praying, and being still on the threshold of their underworld, thought of her sympathetically, as a soul haunting the same territory, a soul cut out of immaterial substance, not a woman, a soul. Annotation here, Miss Kilman is poor, and as a female without beauty, she has no power. She struggles to even connect with God. So, and this is Woolf's comment on women's lives, this, lack of power, and there's also the bigger question of religion that you made a note of before, that it isn't, it's not a satisfactory replacement for human connection. And these other people who are coming in can quickly say a prayer and then get up happily and leave, and she's left there far longer, praying, trying to, get above the vanity. So that's the flesh. She wants to no longer care about how she looks. She wants to go above her desires and the things that she doesn't have. But Mr. Fletcher had to go. He had to pass her, and being himself neat as a new pin, could not help being a little distressed by the poor lady's disorder, her hair down, her parcel on the floor. She did not once let him pass, but as he stood gazing about him at the white marbles, grey window panes, and accumulated treasures, for he was extremely proud of the Abbey, her largeness, robustness, and power as she sat there, shifting her knees from time to time, it was so rough the approach to her God, so tough her desires, impressed him, as they had impressed Mrs. Dalloway. She could not get the thought of her out of her mind that afternoon. The Reverend Edward Whittaker, and Elizabeth too. Now we switch to Elizabeth's point of view. Alright, now with this, Elizabeth is a young woman entering adulthood at a time when the world was really shifting for women. So the politics were shifting, women were about to get the vote. I'm pretty sure it came in not long after the novel. I'm going to have to look that up to double check. But all the things that, were denied Clarissa, and certainly denied Miss Kilman, are there for Elizabeth in a way that is very new, and so she can choose what she wants to do. Of course, it's still just the very beginning. Women and feminism and everything had a very, very, very long way to go, but it's the time when the shaping of female identity was going to be, or was starting to be, less about, because this is all about, starts off, she's talking about how social expectations and the way people view her are the way that she is shaped at the moment, but she rejects this because she feels like her female identity is being imposed upon her by others' thoughts and opinions, and the way men find her attractive, and what people assume about her because of her social class and her appearance and her beauty. She's not a fan of it. All right. So, and Elizabeth waited in Victoria Street for an omnibus. It was so nice to be out of doors. She thought perhaps she need not go home just yet. It was so nice to be out in the air. So she would get on to an omnibus, and already, even as she stood there in her very well-cut clothes, it was beginning. People were beginning to compare her to poplar trees, early dawn, hyacinths, fawns, running water, and garden lilies, and it made her life a burden to her, for she so much preferred being left alone to do what she liked in the country. But they would compare her to lilies, and she had to go to parties, and London was so dreary compared with being alone in the country with her father and the dogs. Buses swooped, settled, were off, garish caravans glistening with red and yellow varnish. But which should she get on to? She had no preferences. Of course, she would not push her way. She inclined to be passive. It was expression she needed, but her eyes were fine. Chinese, Oriental, and as her mother said, with such nice shoulders and holding herself so straight, she was always charming to look at, and lately in the evening especially, when she was interested, for she never seemed excited. She looked almost beautiful, very stately, very serene. What could she be thinking? Every man fell in love with her, and she was really awfully bored, for it was beginning. Her mother could see that. The compliments were beginning. That she did not care more about it, for instance, for her clothes, sometimes worried Clarissa, but perhaps it was as well with all those puppies and guinea pigs about having distemper, and it gave her a charm. But now there was this odd friendship with Miss Kilman. Well, thought Clarissa, about 3 o'clock in the morning, reading Baron Marbot, for she could not sleep. It proves she has a heart. We have a little intrusion there of Clarissa's point of view. Suddenly Elizabeth stepped forward and most competently boarded the omnibus in front of everybody. She took a seat on top. Think of the omnibus like it's one of those English double-decker buses that has got the open air seating on top, and so she's going and taking a seat up there, and these words, she's stepping forward and she's competent, and she goes up to the top, and so this is referring to this new power for women that is beginning to emerge in the modernist era. The impetuous creature, a pirate, started forward. This is referring to the bus. So these buses, when they were privately owned, were often referred to as a pirate. So we've got here, we might write this down before I read, and I've got it in the colour for gender. The metaphor of the bus as a pirate ship allows Elizabeth to be seen as a figurehead. Now, a figurehead is that carving of a woman that is at the very, very front of ships, and so it leads the way. So in this sense, by metaphorically referring to Elizabeth as a figurehead, it's symbolising newly emerging independence of women, as Elizabeth is represented as the leader of her own life. There's lots of barking going on. Okay. The impetuous creature, a pirate, started forward, sprang away. She had to hold the rail to steady herself. For a pirate it was, reckless, unscrupulous, bearing down ruthlessly, circumventing dangerously, boldly snatching a passenger or ignoring a passenger, squeezing eel-like and arrogant in between, and then rushing insolently, all sails spread, up Whitehall. And did Elizabeth give one thought to poor Miss Kilman, who loved her without jealousy, to whom she had been a fawn in the open, a moon in the glade? She was delighted to be free. The fresh air was so delicious. It had been so stuffy in the Army and Navy stores. And now it was like riding, to be rushing up Whitehall. And to each movement of the omnibus, the beautiful body in the fawn-coloured coat responded freely like a rider, like the figurehead of a ship. For the breeze slightly disarrayed her. The heat gave her cheeks the pallor of white painted wood, and her fine eyes, having no eyes to meet, gazed ahead, blank, bright, with the staring, incredible innocence of a sculpture. So it's actually a simile here. We've got the metaphor of the pirate ship, simile of her as like a figurehead, but then this imagery is of a figurehead. It is a sculpture, and the eyes gaze ahead. It was always talking about her own sufferings that made Miss Kilman so difficult. And was she right? If it was being on committees and giving up hours and hours every day, she hardly ever saw him in London, that helped the poor. Her father did that, goodness knows, if that was what Miss Kilman meant about being a Christian, but it was difficult to say. Well, she would like to go a little farther. Another penny, was it up to the Strand? Here was another penny then. She would go up to the Strand. She liked people who were ill, and every profession is open to the women of your generation, said Miss Kilman. So she might be a doctor, she might be a farmer. Animals are often ill. She might own 1,000 acres and have people under her. She would go and see them in their cottages. This was Somerset House. One might be a very good farmer, and that, strangely enough, though Miss Kilman had her share in it, was almost entirely due to Somerset House. It looked so splendid, so serious, that great grey building, and she liked the feeling of people working. She liked those churches, like shapes of grey paper, breasting the stream of the Strand. And here we've got the anaphora of she might represents new possibilities for women. About to run out of time. The rest will be in a second video. It won't be very long at all.